Okay, so I'm working a little bit at cross purposes today. The equipment is not set up as it normally is. I'm not even sure that the version of the material that I finished last night to bring to you is exactly the right material. Chantal and I have had one challenge after another this morning, but we're moving forward. And I hope that you get from this whatever you need. So, the topic today is imposter syndrome. And I want to make clear, I'm not trying to talk anyone into seeing themselves in this material, but to the extent that newcomers, hi, the extent that it does resonate with you, that's where I want you to start. But if it doesn't feel 100%, that's okay. And I want to credit to one of my clients who was brave enough in one of our previous counseling sessions 2 weeks ago to say that she feels like an imposter and was aware that this actually is considered a syndrome. So I thought, well, I think of it more as a level of confidence and a level of giving yourself credit for the capacity you have at any point in time. And I strongly, strongly recommend that if this resonates significantly with anyone, I want you to go back to the material by Dr. Jane Burka, Dr. Lenora Ewan in Procrastination. All right. And I'm going to give you some other topics, some other authors rather today to look up if this is kind of feeling like home base for you. All right. So I want to credit the work of a few people because, as well as my own clinical experience over the last 35 years as a social worker, 20 of which specializing in hoarding, I always go to other experts as well to enrich the material I bring to you and to give you additional resources. As you can see behind me, Suzanne and I wrote a book on hoarding, all right? And I've just finished, and it's launched, the audiobook version. Again, it's on hoarding and other ancillary conditions. I'm not an expert on imposter syndrome, but it certainly resonates with things that I hear every day in my clinical practice. So the people whose work I would like to offer you further access to are Dr. Jessamy, Jessamy Hibberd, Hibberd. And she wrote The Imposter Cure. You're not a fraud. You do deserve success. You can believe in yourself. And here's how to stop feeling like a fraud and escape the mind trap of imposter syndrome. Whew, what a title. As I reviewed some of her work, I really liked her work because Dr. Jessamy Hibberd thinks like I do. And she approaches her clients with respect, compassion, humility, and I think that's a winning combination. It's also quite rare. So let's start with what is imposter syndrome so that every little insecurity doesn't get labeled imposter syndrome. Apparently, the first two clinical psychologists to talk about imposter syndrome were Dr. Pauline Clance, Clance, and Dr. Suzanne Imes, Imes, way back in 1978. And interestingly enough, they remarked first that high achieving, very capable female students were full of doubt about their abilities, and they worried about being able to continue at that level of success. To a person, they articulated their concerns and misgivings. And they were convinced that they would be discovered as a phony, especially when they were put to the test of being examined. For instance, having to speak up in a meeting, being able to express an articulate, insightful opinion on something. They conducted 150 interviews, and all of them were with highly overtly demonstrable, successful women, students and professionals. And they found way back in 1978, and it continues to today, that despite the degrees these people have achieved, the accolades, scholastic honors, they clearly represent high achievement, standardized tests, there was no subjective aspect to it. To a person, these women did not experience an internal sense of success. What a pity that they didn't find a way to credit themselves with that, or they hadn't been taught the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. Internally, they felt a level of phoniness that caused them fear and insecurity, no matter what success they'd actually achieved. And it just has to be said that experiencing such intense feelings that were clearly undeserved by overt demonstration of their achievements, they still had overwhelming fear that everything was just on the cusp of falling apart, going out of control, or they were just about to be discovered. There was no evidence to the contrary, but to a person, 150 high achieving women, all right, expressed these same fears and concerns. So let's ask ourselves, what part does society play? What part does our culture play? What part does our family of origin play? And finally, the most important, what part do we play as individuals in making ourselves vulnerable and susceptible to imposter syndrome? All right. So who is included in this imposter syndrome cohort? Who is it likely to affect? Well, originally the research was based on a very small, restricted, well-defined group, but they're finding since 1978 moving forward, this discussion has continued, research has continued. Other mental health professionals started to pick up on the idea, and they started to notice once they asked the right questions. Ask the right questions, you'll get the right answer. All right. They started to notice and recognize that actually about 70% of people, generally, that's male and female, at some point, or hopefully not, but it does happen long term, have felt some degree of imposter syndrome. And then there's something that's pretty much everyone's experience in some way. Can you relate to it? Are you somebody who at any degree, or maybe at particular times, or maybe in particular situations, find yourself more vulnerable to these insecurities and thought patterns? The reason I'm making this week's topic imposter syndrome is because it harms the individual so profoundly. It basically takes them out of the game, cuts them off at their knees, men and women, and it also occurs across all different cultures. This, like hoarding, all right, doesn't respect your socioeconomic status, your education level, your culture, geographically, your age range, all right, doesn't respect anybody. Anybody can be made to feel vulnerable to being not quite good enough. And I want to credit all of those people who way back asked, Elaine, can you tell us more about why we never feel enough? because this is a tiny piece of that question. And the material we're going to go through today is just kind of the beginning. We're probably going to do about 3 segments on this, all right? So the question would be then, is this really, hopefully, a level of developing confidence in oneself based on facing challenges, falling and bruising your knees, and figuring out how to get back up and get back in the game? Is it actually part of growing up and facing the fact that not only are you not perfect, but if you have fleeting moments of brilliance, you're not defined by that because they're not going to last very long. All right. And you're also not obliged to continue at that level. Maybe it's just part of the human condition. Maybe it doesn't have to be so much about your deficiencies or your perceived inadequacies and insufficiencies. Maybe it just has to say more about where you are on that continuum of maturation, of not giving into the fear and maybe the taught and engendered principle and need that you should aspire higher and higher and higher, and that nothing counts if it isn't perfect. Okay. It is known that imposter syndrome does seem to run on a continuum from occasional worry. Hopefully that's where most of us are and stay, that you're not quite up to a task. It can also, though, continue right to the other end of the spectrum, full-blown, persistent fear of being found out. That's the real cruel cost to this imposter syndrome. Always living kind of on the edge that the next thing you say is going to out you, all right? Because you're not intelligent as everybody else. You're not intelligent enough. You're not capable enough if you're not at the head of the pack. It can cause chronic self-doubt, fear, shame, making it hard to enjoy any success or any level of a sense of fulfillment. Isn't that why we work? Isn't that why we do things? Because we find them fulfilling, or we want them to. Feeling that you're passing is incredibly crazy making and stressful. It can also affect people at different stages in their life. And it can increase or decrease in severity depending on what else is going on in your life. Maybe like COVID, all right? Maybe living with that looming fear that the next thing you do, the next person you meet, the next place you have to go to, the hidden enemy, that not perceptible threat is right there. So you're at a heightened level of insecurity, maybe increasing and decreasing that severity. Depends on how you're going to manage what else is going on in your life so that you don't have to be susceptible to imposter syndrome. You can let yourself off the hook. Maybe it only happens when you're attempting to learn or perform something new, like a new task. Who can reasonably expect themselves when they're learning something to be proficient at it? And remember, Jane Burke and Lenora Ewan said in the book Procrastination that some people subscribe to the belief or the attitude, maybe not quite a belief, but an attitude that if it's hard, somehow that indicates that you're not smart enough, you're not good enough, you're not competent enough, that learning process, that struggle to become proficient and better at it isn't actually something that you can reasonably expect little by little by little by little you will get better at, and you'll get as good as you need to be. That if it's hard, if you're smart, it shouldn't be hard. That's a bad attitude All right. See what you can do to let go of that today if you hold on to that. Maybe it only happens if you're really pushing yourself to be perfect. Is that possible? Okay. For so long that you exhaust yourself, you no longer understand how you're going to sustain the effort. All right. And so, why does it happen? Can it be triggered by any other form of achievement or approval? Does approval mitigate the perception of the fact that you're an imposter? Or, as many of my clients have said, that when they throughout their day, when they get affirmation, when they get compliments, when they are approved of, they can't accept them. They can't accept them because in their mind, they say to themselves, if you only knew the truth about what I go home to, how disorganized I am, how incompetent I am, how incapable I am. And so even something that legitimately they deserve credit for, because they're not perfect, because they have a problem in another area, they feel like an imposter, right? That's not fair. That's not fair to you. And you wouldn't believe that of anybody else. Please don't punish yourself in that way. Please don't discredit and disable yourself in that way. You may have proficiencies in particular areas. I want you to go back. I want you to really read that chapter in Jane Burkett and Lenora Ewan's book in Growth Mindset versus Fixed Mindset, so that you can let yourself off the hook. All right. So let's ask ourselves, why does it happen? All right. When you're trying to achieve things, periods of transition or change can seem in some people to heighten the likelihood and the intensity that this imposter syndrome fear will show its face. Things like going for the challenge of higher education, a new job, a promotion. Okay. If you're out of your comfort zone, for sure you don't have stabilizing routines in place that help mitigate that additional pressure. And then you're left in the never ending extra pressure that we all feel, sometimes in a workplace or when your performance is being scrutinized in a performance review. Whenever somebody seems to be judging you, you realize the words judging you is a very powerful word, a very powerful concept, as opposed to assessing. Assessing is more of a growth mindset. Assessing is, I'm going to tell you where you really have it nailed, and I'm going to tell you where I see you should put more effort, or you could put more effort in kind of rounding out your competency. When you're judged, you pass or fail, right? And we've been taught that, all right? So if you're afraid that they are judging you, and you have this latent insecurity, you may very well go to a belief that being as intuitive as you are, all right, you know by their facial expressions or what they say, the other people say or don't say, you know, whether they make good eye contact. Intuitively, you know that. If you believe that you're a really intuitive person and you can read people, that's one of the 11 problematic thinking styles. They call it mind reading, or they call it projection. All right. And mind reading, you're only coming from your own values, your own fears, your own insecurities, your own perceptions. If you don't have the courage to check that out, test it by asking the person, you know, I saw you you had an interesting facial expression when I said that. What do you think about what I just said? How do you feel about this? What would your advice be? You can take advice. It's just something to consider, but check out your perceptions, because the other person may have been somewhere off in their own reverie, thinking about something else, or you said something, it reminded them of something and they went AWOL. You're reading their facial expression and you think it's about a judgment of you, or maybe it's just a really bad case of gas. It could be anything. All right. Have the courage to ask the person. Check it out. Don't mind read. You're on really, really shaky, imperfect ground, believe me, when you mind read people. And also, this imposter syndrome tendency, as well as mind reading, it's a bit of a mind trap, isn't it? Because there's a tension between 2 points of view. Tension isn't the way to succeed. There's your point of view and what you believe the other person expects of you. All right. Could be between two different standards, where unless they always agree with you, or you always get a positive body language, verbal feedback, somehow you're not good enough. You're not perfect enough. All right. Or it's not ideal. Ideal is just another nice word for perfect. Perfection doesn't last beyond the lifespan of a fruit fly. It's not something we should aspire to, because it can't last. By definition, it can't last. Nothing lasts forever. Not the best, not the good, not the bad. That's the great thing. You're having a bad time like Chantal and I were having this morning. All of you people are going to show up and things are going to improve. The next stage is coming. It's the next thing that's going to happen. Don't aim for perfection. It's a waste of time. And as I say, we're not perfect. We're not supposed to be perfect. So if you're aiming for perfection and you think that you can actually achieve it and stay there, we need to talk, because that's not reality. You're stuck in some altered version of reality if you think that's worth your effort. It isn't. And whoever taught you that to the nth degree, something worth doing is worth doing perfectly, worth doing well enough, the right way. What does the right way mean? Context is everything. What was right way back there? What is right in the future is not necessarily, probably not, in fact, right in this moment in time. Context is everything. Do the best you can figure out how to do and be satisfied. I want us to embrace the concept of good enough. Sometimes, if we aspire to more, that's okay. But we don't make it necessary. We don't make that the only way to let ourselves off the hook and feel good enough about ourselves. Everything we take on, everything we see, every task, every job, every opportunity isn't equal. Why would you spend all your energy doing one job that isn't necessarily a high priority perfectly, scrupulously? You could save that energy, do a good enough job, and have a little steam in the tank and a little joy in life because you've let yourself off the hook. Be gentle with yourself. Be kind to yourself. Okay? Save some of that energy for that job that really, or that opportunity that really is like climbing a steep hill. Don't give it all away to every piddling little thing that comes across your day. Okay. So if you try to perform up to a standard of perfection, here's what's going to happen. You end up constantly punishing yourself. Would you do that to anybody else? Would you do that to a child? Where did you learn that? Because it's time to unlearn it. It's time to let that concept go, that need. All right? The shame you feel, the anxiety you put yourself through and keep yourself in, okay, leads only one way. It only leads to you proving your fear that you're not good enough. Can you see the loop you're stuck in? All right? That self-punishing, you're not actually asking for objective feedback. Objective feedback, if you're wondering what an important person is thinking, ask them. Don't mind read. Maybe all of those times that you thought you weren't saying what they really needed to hear and believed about you, maybe they actually believe something very different. Maybe it's just very average. It's okay to be average in some ways. Okay, maybe when you mind read people, those people were just having their own version of a bad day, right? Here's where I want to stress something, that no matter what the situation is, never make a decision dealing from fear. Never go to fear. All right? The best and the worst doesn't last forever. Going to fear disables you, okay? Even when you feel that fear, it's not that you will never feel afraid. Okay? I'm not saying you won't feel afraid. We all feel afraid sometimes, but don't give in to it. Never go to fear and stay there, right? Go to fact. You're always better knowing the facts, because the facts point to the solutions you need to escape the tyranny of this self-judgment. This self-judgment is the tyrant, all right? And you're doing that to yourself. If you ask for feedback, yeah, sometimes you may get a negative piece of feedback. So you were right. But most of the time, you won't. You'll get some neutral or maybe even a positive. And that's the only way to be good enough. That's the only way to face down this fear of you're going to be found out, is to ask. Ask for the feedback. Ask for the information. You can't be outed then. You're asking for an opinion. You're not out there, hanging out over the edge when you ask for feedback or an opinion, but you are when you mind read, because 70% of the time, probably you're going to get it wrong. There was something else entirely. And then you're going off on that path, still in fear that you're going to be outed. Outed for what? You're probably on the wrong path if you're mind reading. Can you see the conundrum you're creating for yourself if you give in to this? All right. So when you judge yourself as competent, what's your standard? Do you have a standard other than the other person agreeing with you or the other person being satisfied? So the perfectionist, if you are one, that standard can almost guarantee that at some point and to some degree, you either have felt or will feel currently that you're passing and that you are an imposter, because the two things go hand in glove: imposter syndrome and perfectionism. Perfectionism is the recipe for procrastination. Procrastination is never going to do anything other than make you feel insecure, afraid, not good enough, and sooner or later, knocked out of the game and a failure. Do you see how you just went around in a circle? What's the answer? The answer is a growth mindset where you are allowed to make mistakes. You try not to make them, of course. You're allowed to make them, but you learn from them. You know, when you do something and it doesn't work out quite as well as you had hoped, or maybe not well enough at all, you ask yourself, okay, self, that didn't go so well. What part did we play in that not going well? What part did somebody else, if somebody else is a factor, play in that not going well? And what part did just environmental circumstances play? Because here's the other truth. We're not that important. All right. We are not the whole sole cause for why things happen. We're just not that important in the all over picture of the universe. We're a part. We're only a piece of that puzzle. All right. So if it didn't turn out well, maybe you played a part, but it isn't all about you. It isn't all about anything you did. You've always got to assess when things work well and when they don't work well. They're in equal parts because of the circumstances under which you did it. Okay? In a growth mindset, you allow yourself appropriately to be fact-based, and those facts are based on, altogether now, the other F word, feedback. You ask people. So now your whole identity, your whole self-esteem doesn't rest on it. All right? It doesn't. They're not that important either. There are probably always 6 good ways to fix something. You'll find one of them, but you won't find it by following mind reading. Okay, so ask for the feedback. How well do you think I performed on that? How well do you think I did? And what do you think about this part that I'm not as satisfied with? What was your perception of that? That enriches your experience, because when you judge yourself or somebody else, you can only come from one perspective. You're only one piece of the puzzle. All right? That's how you learn to do things differently, especially where it's important enough to you that you want to do them differently, or you need for some other reason to grow and do things differently. Being the perfectionist also sets you up for feeling that if you want something done right, you need to do it yourself. Okay, tell the truth. How many out there? How many people out there? Come on. Well, of course, I prefer to do it myself. Do you prefer to do it yourself, or do you need to do it yourself? Here's the catch-22. You're saying to yourself, if you want something done right, you need to do it yourself. What that means is that you're the only one who has the right way to do something. I prefer to do it myself because I want it done the way I want it done is an honest statement, but the right way? There are probably 6 right ways to do anything. Don't buy on for the big lie that because you're happy with how something turned out and you did it yourself, that those 2 things are correlated. No, you're happy with it because it was done according to your aesthetic. It was done in a way that satisfies you. That doesn't make it right. Joe Blow, Susie Q can do things in their way as well. They work out slightly differently, but they're still just as right as your way. Okay. The reason it's important to face that truth down is because if you can never work as a team, the only person you can guarantee making happy and satisfied is not your boss or anybody else who has the power or the influence to do something positive for you, to make that effort worthwhile. You need to include their point of view. You need to have more of a perspective than just what you believe. All right. Now, if you're doing your own dishes, that's one thing. But where there is a social or an environmental or work-related reciprocity relationship, you need to be a team player. If you insist on doing things yourself and you tell yourself whatever that reason is back here, all right, you're going to be a pretty tired person. And you're not going to be able to achieve as much or complete as much because you only have the power of one. If you could become a team player, then you really could figure out how much at that point in time, in this one instance, you don't actually know. And you can watch somebody else who, in some aspect, not the whole shooting match, in some aspect, is better at it than you do. You can either ask them to coach you, or you can, if pride takes over, you can just watch how they do it and learn. And then there's one less thing that can go wrong in your life, unless the context changes. Do you see why it's so important to be part of a team? All right. Then you don't have to worry about being outed. You just gather more information. You ask, you're one piece of that team if something didn't work. And however many other people have experience in that group, that team, you share the responsibility. It isn't all on your shoulders. And you can't be outed. Then the team can put their collective wisdom, their collective problem-solving skills and ideas together. And you're probably going to come up with the answer that all of you are now going to be better prepared at, more knowledgeable and more competent. And you may actually have built an ally, somebody that when you're not feeling as strong, you're not feeling as competent, you're feeling more vulnerable, because these feelings come and go. Okay? This isn't the last time you're going to feel this way. You're just going to nip it in the bud sooner so it doesn't get a jump on you. You've got somebody to go to. You've got somebody to say, I'm having a little difficulty with this. This is the way I think I want to handle it. But I value your input. How would you handle that? Would you do this somewhat the same, not at all the same, exactly the same? You're you have allies. That means your back's covered. You can't be outed and hung out to dry, alone, just hanging there feeling inadequate. You got people who will cover your back. Or, you know what? Say you made 100%, you were solely responsible mistake and you've got an egg all over your face. You got people who will help you remove the egg and get back on your feet and feel okay about yourself. That's a winning combination, because you weren't put into this world alone and you're not meant to be alone. All right? Let people ally with you. Let people cover your back and you can cover theirs. Or maybe you hold on to a standard of being basically just naturally a genius. Okay? Because you're good at something, it should be easy, right? No, if it's easy, it's probably easy. And bad news, there's probably something down the road that's going to get considerably more difficult and you're not going to feel like such a genius. Humility. I am an imperfect. I say this to myself every day. Chantal had lots of evidence of it this morning. I am a flawed, imperfect human being. All right? Just the way I'm supposed to be. And I don't expect myself to be competent or perfect at anything other than what I know. I know what I know. and I rely on others to help me with the parts that I don't know, or I don't care if I know, because I can't be good at everything. And I'm not somebody who can keep all the balls in the air. I don't even want to. I invite you to join my club. Okay? Well, you kind of have, because you show up every week. And I appreciate it. Maybe you like to fly solo, which is not quite the same thing as being a natural genius, because you want full credit. And you also want it done exactly your way. It's important to you that you're given all the credit for completing the task, not sharing it. Dear, do you carry, we'll go over that one, do you carry independence to too high a level? Because if you're that independent and you needed help, could you ask? Could you accept it? How many times has your unwillingness or inability to ask for help left you in the lurch? All right. How many times has that affected the quality or the speed of the outcome? Do you consider asking for help or needing help some sign of failure or inadequacy? I'm going over these because these are the ways that you won't even consider building allies and being part of a team, which lessens your culpability when things go wrong and they don't work out. But it also increases the probability that you'll be part of many more successes. Okay. Do you always have to be the expert? Do you need to be expertly informed? And if you're not expertly informed, you're not entitled to an opinion. You have to be authoritative. All right. I know someone who has to be authoritative, and they also had 14 tons of newspapers, all of which really hadn't been read completely, but they kept them because if they needed to know the details, they could go back to them. Do you see how buying on for an unhealthy concept sets you up to other beliefs and helps you, supports you, influences you to buy on for strategies that are really, really destructive to you? When the initial concept is off base, where it's going to lead you, please hear this, is just increasingly further off base. This weak point in the perception, in the belief, isn't going to lead you anywhere you think it's going to lead you, and it is not going to give you the results, all right, that you're hoping for. And then if you think you feel badly being outed, you're buying on for outed. You're buying on for imposter syndrome. Build allies, be part of a team, ask for feedback. How does it feel when you don't know the answer to every single question? Do you feel obliged to know the answer to everything? Do you blame yourself? Do you live and label yourself some negative term, right? If you do something and it turns out badly, do you label yourself some negative term? People, there's always someone who knows more, does better than each and every one of us. But for most things, there are very, very, very few things in life that it's that important to do precisely. All right? Good enough is good enough most of the time. getting it done. Look around you. If you're coming from a vulnerability to hoard or to let clutter build up, if you're coming from that perspective, are any of the problematic viewpoints, the starting points, the beliefs, the values, the fears, maybe the things you learned at your mother or father or grandparents' knees, are any of them getting in the way of getting the job done? Because getting the job done, completion is more important than precision. I'm going to estimate 95% of the time. Okay? And the other will lead to procrastination. Okay. So we've got 15 minutes to go. I think I'm going to continue with some of this material. And then maybe we'll take some questions. We've got 20 chat questions. Let me finish this one segment and then we're going to go on to the chat questions. So in order to be good enough, have you ever experienced the feeling that you have to run so fast and do so well that you do nothing good enough? That if you're not Superwoman or Superman, do you have to work harder? Do you have to work longer than anybody else to prove yourself? Do you? Do you leave time and space and energy for a personal life, for the people in your life? Okay, who, if something happens to you, their lives are forever changed. Who are those people? Are you giving them enough of yourself? Are you running so fast, especially proving yourself and endearing yourself to other people, being invaluable, being such a help by doing favors, offering energy that you don't give yourself? And you certainly don't have left over for your own life, your own goals, your own needs. Have you ever asked yourself, what are you trying to prove? And who are you trying to prove it to? So now what do you do about it? Especially now that you know it's not particularly working well for you, this imposter syndrome. In fact, it's entirely unwarranted. Okay? To allow yourself to continue to live in fear of discovery, of beating yourself over the head with persistent feelings of probable, likely, oh, assuredly, inadequacy. You came into this world equal and worthy, and no matter what mistakes you've made along the way, and myself included, including just spilling my coffee all over the desk. One more thing, right? It's been that kind of morning. We will overcome. We will survive it and we will overcome as coffee drips into my lap. Okay, I'm human, okay? It's important to be able to laugh at yourself as well. So no matter what mistakes you've made along the way, so long as you've owned them and you've made up for any hurt or damage you've done to others, or possible damage, all right, you've done to others, everyone, yourself included, everyone is allowed to redeem themselves. If they own their own mistakes and they try to make up for it with others they might possibly have hurt, even those that they might possibly have hurt unintentionally, move beyond your fear. This is all a front, okay? That's the fear. Everything I do, everything I am, everything I attempt is a front, and they're going to find out. Move beyond that fear. And we're going to find out how to do that next week. So over to this screen now. So, San, says to everyone, I didn't realize how much my need to do everything correctly, i.e. perfectly, was unhealthy until I learned of the impossible standards and pressures I had inadvertently transposed onto my daughter. What we can't give to another person what we don't have ourselves. And if we don't have self-acceptance for imperfection, we're setting our kids up to feel inadequate as well, and anybody else you love. I've been trying to correct that and undo some of the damage. The insights you've provided today, Elaine, have finally given me a valuable tool. Thank you so much. I really suggest, Anne, and anybody else who any of this material has resonated with, go back to those two authors and have a look there, but especially, all right, go back to Jane Burke and Lenora Ewan. Yeah. Nora says, better than coffee dripping into a laptop. Been there. Okay, thank you for commiserating. You're an ally, Nora. Oh, it's really comfortable, isn't it? Cold coffee in your lap. Leslie, the first time I heard you talk, you said children of narcissists have a voice saying, I only feel that I deserve love and respect if I put other people first. That hooked me. You know what? It's true, though. It's true, because the narcissist, Leslie, the narcissist was setting you up to always put them first. Why? Because there are some unfortunate people, ill people, frankly, unkind people, self-important people who think they are the bee's knees and that they matter a whole lot more than you or anybody else. Okay, Joe and Jane Hunt. This content is so powerful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're very welcome, Joe and Jane. Happy to see you part of the Conquer the Clutter community on Wednesday mornings. Lorraine, okay. Grew up in a household where my mother was always the right way, and there was a right way and a wrong way to do everything. So true. Can't for perfect day, perfect way. There is no perfect day. There is no perfect way. The better way changes according to the context. Okay. All right. Where am I here now? All right. Where are we going to go back up? Okay. Joseph, good morning, everyone. Happy Webcast Wednesday. Hey, Joseph. What a beautiful quote. Sarah and Leslie, thanks. Lots of affirmations for that. I am a master of mind reading, Silver. I know. It comes of being vulnerable at a developmental age when you didn't feel safe asking for feedback. It wasn't that you would be mocked. Well, maybe you would be mocked and teased, but maybe it just wasn't a safe environment, mentally, physically, spiritually. Okay, guess what? You're a big girl now. And you are the master of your own destiny. It's right there in front of you. Whatever the restrictions were for mental, physical, spiritual, emotional safety, you're setting the bar now. You're setting the tune. Okay? Don't mind read. Always ask. It's safe. What's the worst that's going to happen? Someone will disagree with you, or somebody will mock you and laugh. That actually says more about them than it does about you. The healthy person takes a risk. The not so healthy person points fingers, laughs, mocks others. Okay. So, hi, Elaine and all. I have to leave early, but glad to check in, glad to be part of the group. Welcome, Maureen. All right, where are we here? Well, we cannot possibly have gone through 22 messages. And we've got 5 minutes left. Is there any, 2 new messages. Here we go. That's good. Okay, Michaela, where can we find your reading list, Leslie? All right. I will get Chantal to post it on Birchall's Best Books. Okay, we'll send a little excerpt out on the Get Response. So everybody who got the Get Response invitation, we'll get those authors. And I have one or two others as well that I'm going to include and credit as we move forward in this information. I'm an expert on hoarding. I'm not necessarily an expert on imposter syndrome, but I am not above reading other people's work and then sieving it through my clinical experience. Okay. I had some technical difficulties at the beginning, so I missed the first few minutes. Could you please explain again what imposter syndrome means? Like a short definition. Thank you so much. Okay, well, let me just go back here and see where we are, and maybe we will finish up our last 4 minutes there. So let's start with what is imposter syndrome? This is based on research going back to 19th that has consistently held true. All right. That research was initiated by Dr. Pauline Clance, C-L-A-N-C-E, or Clancy, and Dr. Suzanne Imes, I-M-E-S. So imposter syndrome is that internal experience that a person feels they're phony. It has caused them fear and insecurity, no matter what success they've achieved, no matter what overt evidence there is of success or achievement. They find it very uncomfortable and they fear that this affirmation has happened by mistake or luck or because somebody liked them. They experience intense feelings that their achievements are undeserved, and they have an overwhelming fear that everything is just on the verge of falling apart, despite the evidence to the contrary, and that sooner or later, probably sooner, people are going to discover that they're not as smart, not as fill in the blank. Depends on what you hold up as the hallmark of what you want to excel at. People are going to find out that really they don't know as much. They're not as good. They're not as smart. They're not as something as they believe them to be. Okay, it's a sad situation that is like this tyrant that sits behind you and goes, they're going to find out. They're going to find out. They're going to find out. Okay, no way to live. And you can go back in the podcast when it's posted, and within 2 or 3 days, generally Braden from Burrow Media can get the edited version of the podcast out. He's going to have some job today, boy. While I'm cleaning up the spilled coffee, he's going to be doing massive edits because today has been a challenge. All right. Well, I'm going to sign off for now because my lap is very wet from the coffee. You take care, and I will see you next week. And thanks for showing up. Show up for yourself this week. Take care.